You didn't choose to be a people pleaser. You were trained to be one. And I know that might feel like a heavy thing to hear, because somewhere inside you, there is a part of you that still believes it's just who you are, that you are naturally giving, naturally selfless, naturally someone who puts everyone else first, and maybe you've even worn that like a badge of honor for most of your life. But today, I want to invite you to look a little deeper. Because what most people call selflessness is not always a virtue that was freely chosen. Sometimes it is a survival strategy that was quietly installed in us before we were old enough to know what was happening. So let's start at the beginning. Not your adult life, not your relationships, not your job, not the friendships where you always show up and somehow no one ever shows up for you. Let's start much earlier than that. Let's start with the child you once were. When you were very young, you were completely dependent on the people around you, your caregivers, your parents, the adults in your world. And your nervous system, which was still forming, was constantly scanning the environment for one single question. Am I safe here? Am I loved here? Will I be taken care of? And children are extraordinary at reading the emotional temperature of a room. They feel tension before any words are spoken. They feel when a parent is stressed, when a parent is disappointed, when something they did caused a shift in the energy around them. And here is where it begins. Here is where the training starts. Not with cruelty necessarily, not always with abuse, though that is true for many people. Sometimes the training is subtle. Sometimes it looks like a parent who was emotionally unavailable. A parent who was only warm and present when you behaved in certain ways. A parent who became cold or distant or angry when you expressed certain emotions, when you cried too long, when you said no, when you wanted something different from what they wanted. And your child mind, which is brilliant, which is always trying to solve the equation of survival, learned something. It learned that your needs, your emotions, your authentic self were somehow too much, or not welcome, or dangerous to express. And so you adapted. You became smaller. You became easier. You became the child who didn't make waves, the child who sensed what the adults around you needed and tried to provide it. Because somewhere deep in your nervous system, the message got encoded: if I keep everyone else okay, then I will be okay. That is not who you are. That is what you learned in order to survive. And now you are an adult. And you are still running that same program. The same software that was written in childhood is still running in the background of every relationship you have, every conversation where you feel that familiar tightening in your chest when someone seems upset. Every time you say yes when every cell in your body is screaming no. Every time you apologize for something that isn't even your fault, just to release the tension, just to make the discomfort stop. Every time you shrink yourself to fit into the space that someone else needs you to occupy. You are not doing this because you are weak. You are not doing this because you lack boundaries. You are doing this because your nervous system learned a very long time ago that this was the price of love. And that lesson went so deep that by now it doesn't even feel like a choice. It just feels like you. But here is what I want you to understand. And this might be one of the most important things you hear today. The fact that it feels like you does not mean it is you. The nervous system is not the soul. The patterns we learned in childhood are not our identity. They are adaptations, brilliant, creative, necessary adaptations that helped us survive in environments where our authentic self was not fully welcomed. But adaptations are not destiny. Let me describe what people-pleasing actually looks like in daily life, because sometimes we don't recognize it in ourselves. We think people-pleasing is just being nice, but it goes much deeper than that. People-pleasing looks like reading the room before you enter a conversation and deciding which version of yourself is safe to show. It looks like editing what you're about to say before you say it, running it through a filter of how will this land? Will this upset anyone? Is this too much? It looks like feeling physically anxious when someone around you is in a bad mood, even if that mood has absolutely nothing to do with you. It looks like over-explaining yourself, over-apologizing, filling silence with reassurance because silence feels like disapproval. It looks like chronic exhaustion that has nothing to do with how much you slept last night, because you are spending enormous amounts of energy managing other people's emotional states. It looks like resentment. That quiet, slow-building resentment that you might feel guilty about because you tell yourself you chose to be this giving, you chose to be this helpful. So what right do you have to be resentful? But the resentment is not the problem. The resentment is information. It is your authentic self sending up a signal that somewhere, somehow, you gave something you didn't truly want to give. And you told yourself it was a choice, but it wasn't really. And then there is the loneliness. The particular kind of loneliness that comes from being surrounded by people who love you, or who think they love you, and still feeling profoundly unseen. Because the person they love is the version of you that you perform. The agreeable one, the helpful one, the one who never needs too much. And somewhere inside you, a quieter, truer version of yourself has been waiting a very long time to be known. Now, I want to talk about something that most conversations about people-pleasing completely miss, and that is the role of the body. We talk about people-pleasing as though it is a psychological habit, something that lives in the mind, something we can simply choose to think differently about. And while the mind matters enormously, the truth is that people-pleasing lives in the body. It lives in your nervous system. It lives in the tightening of your throat when you're about to say something honest. It lives in the quickening of your heartbeat when someone around you seems displeased. It lives in the way your stomach drops when you receive a message and you're afraid it's going to be something critical, something that means you've done something wrong, something that means you are not enough. This is called a trauma response. Not trauma in the dramatic sense that popular culture often uses the word, but trauma in the sense that your nervous system experienced something overwhelming early in your life, an emotional environment where it was not safe to be fully yourself. And it learned to protect you by keeping you in a state of constant social vigilance, always scanning, always monitoring, always asking, is everyone okay? Is it safe? What do they need from me right now? And this is why you cannot think your way out of people-pleasing. You cannot simply decide to have boundaries and then have them. Because the moment someone expresses disappointment in you, the moment someone withdraws their approval, your nervous system doesn't hear logic. It hears danger. It triggers the same primal fear that was activated in childhood when love felt conditional, when you sensed that the wrong move might cost you connection, might cost you safety, might cost you the most fundamental thing a child needs, which is to feel that they belong. So what does healing actually look like? How do you begin to untrain something that was wired into you before you had language to understand what was happening? The first thing, the most important thing, is to stop calling it a character flaw. Stop telling yourself that you need to become stronger, braver, more disciplined. Stop treating your people-pleasing as evidence that something is broken in you. Because that story, that harsh self-judgment, is itself a product of the same wound. The wound that told you that as you naturally are, you are not quite enough, that you need to fix yourself, improve yourself, become a different version of yourself in order to be worthy of love. What if instead you brought the same compassion to this part of yourself that you so freely offer to everyone else in your life? What if you could look at the child who learned to disappear, who learned to become whatever the room needed, and instead of criticizing that child, you held that child. You said to that child, you were incredibly creative. You did what you had to do to stay connected to the people you needed. And now we are going to learn something new together. The second thing is to begin noticing the moment before the yes. There is always a moment, a brief, flickering moment between the request and your response, where your body knows the truth before your mouth has already started agreeing. It is a contraction, a small hesitation, a sensation somewhere in your chest or your stomach that is trying to tell you something. Most people-pleasers have learned to override that signal so quickly that they barely notice it exists. But it does exist. And the practice is not, in the beginning, to suddenly say no where you used to say yes. The practice is simply to notice, to become aware that the moment exists, to pause for just a breath and ask yourself, what is true for me right now? That is where it starts. Not in the dramatic confrontations, not in the grand declarations of finally standing up for yourself. It starts in the microsecond of awareness before the automatic response takes over. The third thing is to understand that the people in your life who have benefited from your people-pleasing are not necessarily bad people. Most of them have no idea that the version of you they know is a performed version. Most of them genuinely believe that you love saying yes, that you genuinely want to be that available, that accommodating, that endlessly giving. They have not seen the other version of you because you have never shown it to them. And as you begin to change, as you begin to allow more of your authentic self to be present, some people will adjust and the relationship will deepen in ways you never imagined were possible. And some people will be uncomfortable. Some people, if they are honest with themselves, have been drawn to you precisely because you don't push back, precisely because you are safe in that way. And when you begin to take up more space, when you begin to have preferences and limits, and a self that can say no, they will feel that shift. And that discomfort in them is not evidence that you are doing something wrong. It is evidence that change is real. The fourth thing, and this one reaches into the deepest layer of the wound, is to find a new source for your sense of worth. Because at the core of people-pleasing is a very specific belief about the self. The belief that your value is contingent on your usefulness, that you are worthy of love when you are needed, that you earn your place in someone's life by being helpful, agreeable, easy, low maintenance. That the moment you start asking for something, the moment you start being complicated, the moment you stop being useful, you will be abandoned. That belief is a lie, but it does not feel like a lie. It feels like the most obvious truth in the world, and no amount of someone telling you that you are worthy will change it, because it is not a thought that can be corrected by a better thought. It is a felt sense, a deeply embedded knowing in the body and the nervous system that was built from experience, and so it must be rebuilt from experience, slowly, through moments where you risk showing your real self and discover that you are still loved, through moments where you express a need and someone responds with care rather than withdrawal, through moments where you say no and the relationship survives. And sometimes, yes, through the painful discovery that certain relationships only existed because of what you were providing and not because of who you are. And even that pain, as real as it is, as devastating as it can feel, is ultimately a gift. Because it creates space, it creates the emptiness that authentic connection can eventually fill. I want to close with this. Wherever you are in this journey, whether you are just beginning to recognize these patterns in yourself, or whether you have been working on this for years and still find yourself falling back into the old familiar shape, I want you to know something. You are not behind. You are not failing. You are not a hopeless case because you still sometimes say yes when you meant no. You are someone who learned a very sophisticated way of surviving in a world that asked too much of you too early. And unlearning that takes time. It takes patience. It takes, above all else, the compassion for yourself that you have always been so generous in offering to everyone else. The version of you that learned to please was not wrong. That version of you was wise, was creative, was doing everything possible to stay connected and safe in the only way it knew how. But you are not a child anymore. And the adults around you now are not the same as the adults from your early life, even if your nervous system sometimes treats them as though they are. You have more capacity now, more resources, more choice. And the invitation if you are willing to accept it, is to slowly, gently, one small moment at a time, begin choosing yourself. Not instead of the people you love, but alongside them. Because a love that requires you to disappear in order to survive was never really love. And a version of you that is truly present, truly honest, truly whole, has so much more to give than the one that has been performing all these years. You didn't choose this, but you can choose something different now. And that, at its deepest level, is what healing means.